Yep. But just leave this so I can see everybody's name there.
If I can get everybody's attention, please. I know we run a little bit late on our last education workshop. Thank you all for attending that. This is our third and final one of a very good morning we've had so far. Before we get into this, I just want to say a special thank you to David and Harold and their team of the Education Workshop Committee. I'm not sure who all on that committee is here, but if you are here, if you would stand up, because they've done a fantastic job, put a lot of work in this morning. Thank you. There's not too many. Harold's kicked most of them off, I think. But so, again, thank you all for coming to Southern Exposure 2018. This is our third and final workshop of connecting the dots with blockchain, so we're excited to hear about that. Before we get started, though, I do want to recognize and thank our sponsors of this particular event, and it is Always Fresh Farms, Castle Rock Vineyards, Ham Produce Company, Smith Packing, Weir's Farm, and Walter P. Raw and Sons. So thank you all for your support. And one other thing is the educational workshop refreshment area that we're enjoying outside. Those sponsors as well, just to name those. And now you know Eco Farms, Four Seasons Produce, Fowler Brothers, Fowler Farms, Tasty Fruity International, and the Noons Company. Thank you all very much. And right now I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Frank.
Well, good afternoon. It's good to see each and every one of you. I want to thank the Southeast Produce Council and the sponsors for the invitation and our prestigious panelists. And we're pretty excited about having a conversation with you. And that's what we hope this will be, a conversation about this new and emerging technology, titled Connecting the Dots, Traceability and Transparency Powered by Blockchain. I like to think of it as a new era of traceability and transparency being extremely important in the 21st century. Going to provide just a little bit of context, and then we're going to get right into it because we're pressed for time. But let me start off with this notion that everyone in this room knows that the world is changing. It's changing real rapidly. And that has implications for our business. It certainly has implications for the produce industry. A couple examples. Number one, we know customer expectations are changing. Sometimes we say that and you ask, what does it really mean? We can tell you with absolute authority that what customers expect today is a little different. It used to be that they came into our stores and they wanted great quality produce, they wanted good value, and that was enough. But today, increasingly, customers want to know more about their food. They want to know, how was it produced? Where was it grown? Is it organic and sustainable, and can I trust it? And so customer expectations are changing, and we have to keep up with their expectations. Another thing we talk and hear a lot about is the idea that the food system is changing. And I know we've been hearing that for a long time. What does that really mean? In the 1980s, the typical retail establishment had about 20,000 food SKUs. I was growing up as a kid, entering grocery stores with mom and dad. I was pretty impressed. Fast forward to the 2000s, what do you see? The typical grocery store had about 50,000 SKUs. Pretty impressive, right? The idea that you could walk into a store, have a wide variety of products, fresh fruits and vegetables from around the world at any time. I love blueberries. I used to eat blueberries one time a year. Now I eat blueberries year-round. And so the food system is changing. And think where we're going. Where do you think we'll be at in 10 years? 50,000 plus? We like to think of the idea of an endless shelf, where you can buy anything you want, anywhere, anytime, because the world now is your grocery store. And so the food system is changing. And so as we look at these pressures or changes on the food system and society in general, we have to keep up. It is this race. And we've come across this technology, new and emerging technology called blockchain technology, that we genuinely think could be an enabler to facilitate keeping up with this race and provide value to the food system, and value to the customers, and value to our businesses. And so I like to emphasize we are not chasing blockchain technology as a new shiny coin, but I hope that by the end of this session, you have a better appreciation why blockchain digitizes information differently and truly is a new way to digitize information. Before we get started, how many of you are pretty well versed in blockchain? Okay, a few hands. Okay, we'll probably ask that at the end just to see whether you got value out of this session. So we're honored to have some very prestigious speakers. We're going to start off with Bridget McDermott, who's Vice President of Business Development for IBM. We've been doing some work with her on blockchain, and she's going to talk a little bit about blockchain and the power of blockchain. We're then going to transition to Melanie Noose with GS1, a Senior Vice President in Business Development. Grateful that she made the journey from Denver because the technology is awesome, but it's when it's coupled with standards that's really going to make it scalable. And so we're going to hear the importance of anchoring blockchain traceability and transparency and standards. I'll give a little bit of an update on a proof of concept that we've done with produce, and then we'll close with Brendan from Driscoll's. Thank you for being here, talking one of our very prestigious produce suppliers on why they're interested in the work on blockchain. And so with that, we'll turn it over to Bridget.
Great. Thanks very much, Frank, and thank you everybody here. Really excited to come and talk about what's going on with blockchain. So let me start off with just a little bit of context setting on supply chain. If you think about supply chains, really we've been doing the same thing for decades, if not millennia. And we've been struggling with a lot of the same problems: data visibility, process optimization, and demand management. And I'm going to date myself a little bit, but my first job out of college was COBOL programming and EDI. So the actual digitization of information we've been able to do for, let's just say, more than 5 years. But what have we really done with that information, right? So we have that information digitized. We've been looking at optimizing our processes, and we really care about our customers, and we want to manage demand. And yet we have these systemic inefficiencies, which you see with, in food safety, 400,000 people die every year due to food-related illnesses. In transportation, you see $600 billion worth of fraud, right? There are systemic problems despite the investment that's been made and the technological advances that have happened. And so what we think is that the real gap hasn't been technology, because we've been able to digitize and we've been able to share information, but we haven't had the trust in order to look across the entire food ecosystem and say, how do I create a single way for everybody to share information without losing control of information? It's one thing if Walmart has a traceability solution, which they do have. But when Walmart has one, Kroger also has to have one, and Wegmans also has to have one. When you do something with blockchain, you can have competitors on the same system, and permissioning allows you to have control of your information. And so what blockchain does is it doesn't sort of solve every problem ever known to mankind, or even every problem known to supply chain. But what it does is it solves the problem of trust, and it allows you to start thinking about, how do we take the data that we already have, or the data that we could have, and make it accessible so that we're not thinking about analyzing what happens for inside our four walls. Instead, we're looking at what happens end-to-end in the transaction. We're thinking about why this matters to the customer, so that if the berries that get to a customer didn't have the shelf life you expected, you can see what happened between Driscoll's and Walmart and the customer. End-to-end, being able to look at that. The limitation right now, IBM's estimate is that 80% of the world's data is sitting in silos in enterprises, in companies like yours. And if we share that, then we can take advantage of all of the advances that have been happening in analytics around big data, machine learning, artificial intelligence, predictive, right? The data is there. People just don't have access to it right now. So what is blockchain? There are a few people in the room who know, but I think there are others who are, a little bit confused on blockchain or interested in learning about it. Before I get into the sort of official definition, I actually like to start with an analogy. So I'm from New York City, and I'm very happy to be here because there is a bomb cyclone hitting New York right now, and it's 75 degrees here, and given that choice, really, it's not a choice. But as a true New Yorker, I do the New York Times crossword puzzle every day. And on Sundays, I do it with my friend David. And so we sit down, and we look at the New York Times crossword puzzle, and we say, okay, what's a four-letter word for shiny object in the sky? So it could be star, or moon, or nova. But let's say we decide it's going to be star. So right then, we have a choice. Are we going to write it in pencil, or are we going to write it in pen? I don't know if anyone here does the New York Times Sunday crossword puzzle, but if you've ever tried to impress anyone by doing it in pencil, don't. Your mother will not be impressed. My mother looks at me and she's like, yeah, that's nice. Like, you don't trust me that I wrote it down. I didn't make a single mistake. And yet if you do it in pen, even if you realize later that the answer was moon, and you like cross it out and you write moon in really small letters, or you try and be clever and you make the S into an M so it looks like you, whatever. People can see what the data is. There's a provenance to the data. There's a history to the data. And all of a sudden, there's trust that that data is exactly what you said it was, that there's no way to change it. And so when David and I work together, we have consensus. We agree that this is the data that we're putting in. We agree at the time that we put it into the crossword puzzle. And we put it in a way that neither of us could change it without the other one knowing that we've changed it. That's what blockchain does. So technically, what is blockchain? Well, blockchain is a distributed shared ledger. It's a trusted way of communicating information. And why does this matter? Well, I think in every mob movie I've ever seen, there's a plot line about two sets of books, right? And it's a problem. Well, if you look at the picture that we have up here, you see, business transactions happening between 6 parties. There aren't just 2 sets of books. There's 6 sets of books. And even if no one there is actually doing something fraudulent, there's still the chance for mistake. I mean, believe it or not, once or twice in my life, I've typed something incorrectly into a computer. So if somebody says, I have 42 pallets and someone else has 24 pallets, it's like, yeah, I'm pretty sure that somebody made a fat fingering mistake as they typed it in, but I'm pretty sure it wasn't me, it must have been you, right? And so that kind of thing can take a long time to resolve. But with blockchain, you're looking at that single shared trusted system of record. You're looking at one piece of truth. That's why blockchain matters. And what benefits does that give? Well, it saves time. We did this internal to IBM with our IBM Global Financing Organization. We have a $44 billion business. At any given time, $100 million is tied up in disputes. And this isn't like, us in North Korea kind of thing. This is us and companies we've been working with for decades, but it's that 42 to 24 pallet kind of discussion. And all of a sudden, we went from dispute resolution time of 40 plus days down to 10 with the installation of a blockchain system that allowed everybody to be looking at the same set of data. Removes cost. We're going to talk a little bit about that too. But think about the savings just from the time saved there. Reduces risk. Anytime you have the same information versus having different sets of information, you're going to be able to run your business, work with your counterparties more effectively. And creating this trust means that we can work together in a different way, right? We have the opportunity to stop thinking about, I'm a berry producer or I'm a retailer, and think about, hey, we're here to serve the customer, and how can we do that as efficiently as possible so we all share that value. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Melanie, who will talk a little bit about why standards really matter in using blockchain.
Thank you. Try not to get too comfortable. I might fall asleep. It'd be something if I was doing it while I speak. So hopefully many of you in the audience are familiar with GS1. I'll talk a little bit about our 3 premises, right? We describe GS1 as being a system of standards that produces the global language of business. And we're focused around 3 key areas. The first is identification, primarily of products. So many of you in this industry, of course, are identifying products at the consumer unit, the case, the pallet, maybe the truckload level using GS1 standards. Once you create identification around something, you can embed that into data capture technologies like barcodes, RFID. They can be anything from a generic UPC code, right, product descriptor, to very serialized information that helps you track things in your supply chain. But of course, if you've identified something and you've captured it in some kind of automatic identification technology, you have to share information about it in order to make it useful. So there's a natural connection between data standards and blockchain because we have so many participants in a blockchain network or blockchain implementation that there has to be a common way of speaking to one another so that everyone can process the information. So when you think about what role standards has in blockchain, think of it as taking the identify, capture, and share mechanism and putting it in between distributed ledger technology, right, shared database, data sharing concepts that we're already familiar with, and then being able to layer on business applications like track and trace, like food safety. We sit as that intermediary. I mean, I think trust has been at the hallmark of GS1's existence for the 44 plus years that we've been around, because we sit in that space that allows competitors to determine what's table stakes. What do we have to do in order to all gain efficiency? I think blockchain is a great next wave of where we can all gain efficiencies, and standards are going to be helpful to us in order to scale that. So when you think about how a blockchain solution and a blockchain architecture need a way to transact information between all the different nodes or partners, depending on the term you choose to use, right? We look at standards being the way to facilitate that, those interactions. So we don't develop technology at GS1. It's one of the things I kind of like, is that we're able to help define semantic notions and data definitions and bring those to the table to the technology community. We've been working with IBM extensively on how standards play a role with blockchain solution, and how the standards need to be enhanced, because I think that's one of the interesting things about this technology is it's exposing some gaps, I think, both from where the standards sit and also where practical implementation of good traceability processes sit. So I also want to kind of talk a little bit about that. In order to get the benefit of technology like blockchain, of the notion of multinodal data sharing, I mean, which is really, when we first talked to Walmart, some of the team at Walmart over a year ago, they said one of the best benefits we can get from blockchain is that real-time access that everybody's going to have, right? You're bringing parties to the conversation who never participated before. We've had, so you and I must be the same age, Bridget, because that's what I started my career doing too, was building EDI maps in COBOL. So we started out with this concept that, right, we need to exchange information, and EDI was sort of a great equalizer to allow me to send you something that you could parse and translate on your end. Now that we've got a new technology, blockchain, available to us, it means a couple of things. One, we can get far more granular in the types of information we're sharing. Think of EDI as being very batch-oriented, right? You kind of bundle up a bunch of things, and a lot of times it goes out at the end of the day. It's not particularly real-time. That was one of the light bulbs for me with Walmart, and saying we can get real-time conversation going with our partners. I think the other thing, as Bridget said, we're all sharing that same set of books, meaning even our transportation providers, which in a historical EDI framework were not party to the same transactions that the supplier and the retailer were. They were getting maybe an ancillary copy of it, maybe not at all. And so you're trying to contribute to traceability without having access to all the information you need. And so I think this notion of a shared trusted ledger, I think the other thing that very much excites me about it is people upstream. So, I mean, Driscoll's is a great example of a highly advanced participant from the supply side, but there are a lot of small farmers that participate as well, and probably you guys contract with a lot of those people that, from a technology perspective, had never participated in this idea of providing information. So those people, through the notion of smartphones and increased global connectivity and apps, are going to be able to help us get to a true end-to-end traceable produce supply chain. But it requires a few things. The first is people have to identify things in a commonly understood way. So we talk about global trade item number. It's something that we've been adopting in produce for several years now. We've started seeing a shift from just having a PLU, right, which would give me the lookup capability at the point of sale, but wouldn't tell me at all which grower the strawberry came from, where did this come from, what locations has it been in. So you start by identifying things. The second then is, as I mentioned, you have to capture those in some kind of automatic identification technology. I think the important view that GS1 has is we've been on a long road to adoption, years and years, in fact, in produce traceability, of trying to get the community to identify things, capture those, and whether it's barcodes, RFID. We were just talking before the session, the sensor industry is just exploding with all kinds of interesting and cheap ways to embed an identifier in something that can be read by a machine. But you have to have that identification embedded so that your next party in the line can read it and then as we mentioned, share the data. So transitioning from legacy EDI, which I think still has incredible value. And years ago, you might have participated in a GS1 conference where someone had a session called EDI. Is it alive? ? It's still alive. People are heavily invested in systems, right, that rely on EDI. But what EDI doesn't do is get you down to that physical event kind of tracking. And so about 15 years ago, GS1 started an effort to develop a standard. It's called the EPC Information Services Standard. It's a little bit of a misnomer because it isn't just about EPCs, which are electronic product codes and RFID. It's really about individual, discrete, physical items and what happens to those items from the point they're commissioned, right? So you think at the point the strawberries get picked, they get put into a basket, that basket gets put into a tray. It's about being able to track, if you want to every single basket, maybe every single berry, once we can actually laser etch barcodes on individual strawberries. But see, this importance of data sharing, and I think there's two challenges that we have. One, we haven't achieved full implementation of machine-to-machine interactions in our produce supply chain yet. The percentages are much, much higher than they were years ago. But the second thing is, we no longer have the time that we used to have. So we've been working on EDI for 40 years. I haven't personally, but as a group, we've been working on things like EDI for 40 years. But Frank said at the beginning, right, the consumer expectation is shifting, and it's shifting rapidly. I was talking to an analyst a couple months ago who said that 3 years is the new 10 years. So any of you who watch kind of Orange is the New Black on Netflix, it was a play on that analogy, but 3 years is the new 10 years. So if you're sitting in this room and you think, oh, right, blockchain, it's so esoteric, it's gonna take forever to adopt, I promise you it won't, because you have passionate people sitting up on the stage and other partners that are working with us to make sure that we do this right, but we have to do it quickly. Because the consumer will quickly lose interest in us if we don't address what he or she is asking us to do today. So I think the standards piece is the building block, right? We're just the foundation. We're trying to make sure that we do things in a way that creates the trust that Bridget is talking about, because you have to have the accurate data in order to drive the trust. And I think the best part about blockchain solutions is once you put those building blocks in place, then you actually achieve this notion of accuracy, the end-to-end visibility, and everyone participating in the conversation. I've been most excited in talking to the IBM team about the apps that are going to get deployed for people who are growing lettuce or coffee beans or other types of products in the food supply chain. So just think of us as kind of the interoperability piece. There are a lot of blockchain projects that are being built. I think that what the IBM team is doing with its partners, we have seen great advancements around food safety as a result, and we're focused on being a helper to that sort of awareness, education, and implementation of the building blocks that are actually going to help us scale blockchain in the time we need. And of course, we're right on the same boat with everybody else. We're trying to drive transparency and trust. I think consumers are demanding transparency, not only from the provenance of the products, but the assurance that as foodborne allergy and other things become increasingly part of society, that what I'm giving my children is safe and isn't going to create an adverse effect, and like you said, Bridget, right, be part of that statistic. So I will now hand it over. Maybe. You might have to.
No, it's Frank.
Oh, it's Frank. Sorry, I forgot.
Hit new.
Thank you, Melanie. That was great. So what we're going to try to do now is pivot and talk a little bit about a practical application. You heard about the technology, you heard about the standards, and now you're going to hear about a proof of concept that Walmart did. I wanted to start off with this slide. A little bit of repetition is good. What is blockchain? And you heard Bridget use a technical definition. You always hear it's a distributed, decentralized digital ledger. It has these features that you've heard about, that it's immutable, it's hard to change the record, it's based on consensus. One of the things you probably will hear a lot is that it democratizes information. We believe that's true. We talk about it in terms of creating shared value. Everyone that gets in the system is going to benefit, just not the retailer. And it scales trust. We believe it will allow scaling of trust for all stakeholders very rapidly. But the reason I like to show this model is because you have 3 data models here. which of these data models looks most like the food system? It's that one to the far right that's decentralized. People often talk about a food chain, but all of you know that it's not a linear chain at all, right? If any of you have been involved in a traceback, you know it's not a linear food chain. It's a network. It's a system. And what we've done is we've created digital solutions for linear systems when, in fact, the food system, we shouldn't call it a food chain. We could call it a decentralized and distributed food system. That aligns perfectly with the blockchain definition. So Bridget said, we do have a transparency solution at Walmart. We have a digital system. If you see to the far left, Walmart is that big block on the bottom. We ask our suppliers to get in and disclose some information. We ask them to disclose information about their suppliers. And guess what? Our suppliers never see any of the benefits from the data they've disclosed in our system. And if you're doing business with Kroger's or Wegmans, like you mentioned, you need to get in their systems. And so we have these siloed systems that aren't beneficial or democratic for the entire food system. And what blockchain is doing is solving for the reality of the food system that's over there to the far right and solving the many-to-many complexity that exists today. But I always like to start, why is this important? Because I said at the beginning, I mean this sincerely, we are not chasing blockchain as the new shiny coin. After a year of working on it, I am absolutely convinced that it's a new and different type of technology, and it gives me hope that we're finally going to be able to solve transparency and traceability in a unique way. But the why is really important because it informs our action. What are we after? Well, we want the food system to be as safe as it can be. By and large, it's a pretty good food system, and produce sometimes get a bad rap. The reality, if you think of per capita consumption, Americans are eating a lot of produce without any problems. And we want Americans to eat more produce, and we want Walmart customers to buy more produce. But when foodborne disease does happen, CDC says that 50% or greater of the time, it's produce related. You have some challenges, products grown outside, it's subject to contamination by air, soil, water, people. So the idea of a digital and transparent food system that can inform how food is produced could lead to prevention efforts. Number two, traceability. One of the things we talk about is when there's a food event, especially in the produce industry, in a court of law in the United States, you're innocent until proven guilty. When there's a food scare in the produce industry, what happens? Guilty until proven innocent, right? And we've seen this. The example that I talk a lot about is the spinach outbreak of 2006. You guys know the lesson all too well. You know, CDC and FDA came out and said illnesses associated with bagged spinach. Everybody pulled bagged spinach across all retailers, all food service organizations. Took them 2 weeks to trace it back to the source, and when it was all said and done, it was one producer, 1 day's production, one lot. Anybody grow spinach or supply spinach in here? Took many, many years for the industry to recover. More recently, we've seen it with papayas. We saw romaine or leafy greens in suspect. And so the idea that you can do rapid and accurate traceability, we think will be good for the food system. It could prevent illnesses, and it certainly could allow unaffected product to go undamaged. Food fraud. The example we generally give, and you see the icon here, is the horse meat scandal that happened in the UK. Consumers in Britain going to a retail outlet buying 100% beef lasagna, and in fact, there's no beef in it at all. It's 100% horse meat. The idea of a digital and transparent food system that allows you to track where products come from with greater confidence might deter some of that unscrupulous behavior. And think about organic. Really important for the produce industry. Regulatory requirements, lack of record keeping, we think it'll facilitate that. Food waste. Imagine going into a grocery store, buying 3 bags of grocery, and as you walk out, you throw 1 in the garbage can. Sound ridiculous? But that's what's happening every day across the world and across the country. And so while we think there's a business case for this, we've spent a lot of time analyzing the cost of blockchain and the cost of these types of events to the food system. And obviously, we're a discount retailer. We wouldn't be pursuing this if we didn't think on balance this saves the food system money as opposed to adding cost to the food system. And ultimately, it is about consumer transparency. So let me tell you a little bit about our pilot. To do that, I have to tell you real briefly the story of a life of a mango. And some of you might be very well versed with mangoes, but mango seedlings are planted, and it generally takes 5 to 8 years for those seeds to develop into big producing trees. Mangoes in this hemisphere, I think many of you know, are grown on small farms in Central and South America. Once those mangoes start to ripen, they get picked, they go to a packing house. From the packing house, they get treated, boxed, they get shipped by air, land, or sea to the United States. In this instance, those mangoes cross the U.S. custom border and go to one of our suppliers here in the States, where they get further washed, treated, peeled, sliced, and boxed. Those sliced mangoes then get shipped to Walmart distribution centers across the United States, 40 plus. And then from there, they'll get picked up by Walmart trucks and get shipped to, thousands literally of Walmart stores and Sam's Club, about 6,000 in total across the U.S., get put out on refrigerated display, and we hope that customers pick them up and take them home. Pretty long journey, but the group in this audience knows that this is the way the food system works. Now, if I wanted to know where those mangoes came from, let's say I picked up a package of mangoes in our stores and said, where were these mangoes grown? How long do you think it would take me to identify that? Anybody want to guess? Long time? Look at the label. I could get country of origin, possibly, but I want to know the farm. I want to know exactly where those came from. We tried to do that. I brought a package of sliced mangoes into one of my staff meetings, put it on the desk and said, hey, the traceback study starts right now, literally started at o'clock. It took our team 6 days, 18 hours, and 26 minutes. Now, and people tell us we're pretty good. Health officials tell us when they do tracebacks all the time, they say, you guys are really fast at this. Remember I told you FDA took 2 weeks to do the spinach traceback? Think about papayas. Remember the papaya outbreak that happened last year? 3 weeks later, after we had pulled all papayas from all stores, we were told, we've identified the farm, and guess what? Walmart didn't carry those papayas. For 3 weeks, we were not selling papayas. It affected 22 small farmers. Weren't even affected. And so the idea of doing this fast is important for a couple of reasons. One, if there's a real public health risk and you're not pulling product, 7 days is a lot of time for people to buy product and potentially get ill, hospitalizations, and death. On the other hand, if you do what we do in abundance of caution, you pull all the product, only to find out you're unaffected, that's 7 days of lost sales, 7 days of destroying livelihoods of small farmers, 7 days of food waste, and so speed and accuracy matters, and this is a perfect example. And so what we did is we worked with IBM to say, can we actually test whether the blockchain solution would make a difference in this case? So we worked with the supplier, and the supplier worked with their suppliers, and this is an infographic that tries to depict what we did. We captured information at the farm level on the blockchain solution, information at the packing house on the blockchain solution, so forth, all the way to our DCs and stores. And we did that for a period of weeks and a couple of months. And afterwards, Bridget and I actually did a demo in front of 20 plus media outlets at Walmart shareholders meeting. We had the courage, I think today I probably wouldn't be so courageous to do it live. Put in a code, and in 2.2 seconds, we saw in the blockchain solution that was developed at that time a map come up, and you could see the specific 2 farms in Mexico where the mangoes were grown, and a lot more information. And so this is what I call food traceability at the speed of thought. As fast as you can think it, you just scan it, and you know with certainty these are the farms that it came from. But as I stated, traceability isn't the end game. It really is transparency. And so in our proof of concept, we showed that it's actually providing a lot more than traceability. Because what I had in 2.2 seconds wasn't only the 2 farms in Mexico from which this product came from, but this is a visual diagram of the user interface and how it came up. I could actually see how those mangoes traveled from 2 farms to 1 packing house. It's hard to see there, but on top of those boxes, you'll see dates. So it took 1 day to get from the farm or the orchard to the packing house. It took another day to actually get to the custom broker, a long lag there getting into the US and then to a processing facility, then Walmart DC and stores. But I could see how it flowed, and if there's any opportunity to optimize that supply chain. I could also click on any of those boxes and get records that we thought were important to capture during this pilot. I could see whether the farms had their good agricultural practices certifications, Global Gap, for example. I could see at the packing houses the mangoes received the hot water treatment required by USDA for them to be approved or allowed to be shipped into the US. I could see at the processing facility. So I like to say I had a lot of transparency. I've been doing this for a long time. And just the idea that within seconds I could get this information. For me to get this information today takes a long time. Have to talk to a lot of people. So I had all of this at my fingertips. Now, why is this important? I like to say, what's the opposite of transparency? People often say opaqueness. I like this term anonymity. The opposite of transparency is what I think a lot of the food system has today, a lot of anonymity. We don't know with certainty where the products came from, how they flowed. If something changes tomorrow, you might not know. More importantly, how were they produced? If they say it's organic, is it really organic? Do they have a food safety certification? Is it valid? And so this idea of using a digital technology like blockchain to create transparency, we use the analogy that it's the equivalent of shining a light on every point in the food system. And I do believe this with every fiber of my being, that transparency is a big idea for the produce system, and a good idea. Because transparency, what do you have when you have anonymity? Do you want anonymity in the classroom? Do you want anonymity at the bank teller? No, you want transparency, because anonymity disinhibits undesired behaviors. If it's anonymous, I might be able to cheat on my exam. If it's anonymous, I might be able to steal a 20. But transparency provides accountability. And we believe that after accountability, transparency leads to responsibility, people just self-governing their behaviors. And so transparency, I think, would be a good thing for the food system, and it would benefit all stakeholders. And so that's our proof of concept. With that, we're going to close with the supplier now that's part of this project with us.
Hi, everybody. So I'll take a little bit of a different take on this and why Driscoll's was interested in participating with IBM and Walmart in terms of what we view it as a pilot at this point. But so let's talk through this. The goal for Driscoll's, like a lot of you in the room, we're getting hit up about blockchain. We get approached by a number of vendors about blockchain, and we're not quite sure at this point early on what it was, to be honest with you, and then who to partner with. But for us, we want to align with our customers. So this is important to Walmart. We want to make sure we're supportive of Walmart and a number of other customers. But also scale is important for us. So a partner like IBM brings a lot of value in that context as opposed to some startups in Silicon Valley or something like that. So we wanted to get in early. We wanted to work with some key partners and see if we could influence, get in on the ground floor and influence the direction of where the technology was going for the industry and not necessarily be on the tail end and being told, okay, you must do this, that type of thing. So it's important for us to get in early and see if we can contribute as well. We want to be supportive of food safety, as Frank is mentioning. It's very important to us as well, obviously. But beyond food safety, not to minimize food safety, but I was chatting with this morning, supply chain visibility and traceability for us is extremely important. For Driscoll's, it's about consumer delight, about the berry experience itself. So I look at blockchain technology as an opportunity to further understand supply chain performance and really supply chain visibility. So I'll touch on that a little bit further, but you've already seen some of that in the prior slides. In all honesty as well, participate in the pilot and figure out what value does blockchain bring to Driscoll's. So it's a technology we're being approached to participate in it, but what does it mean to us? What do we get out of it? Is there any value for Driscoll's to participate in it? So that's one of the things that we are trying to determine. I see a lot of upside on it, but to us, it's not quite the new bright, shiny object. I understand more of it, but to us, it was a little bit of the foreign, shiny object, right? So we're trying to figure out, is there value for Driscoll's to participate in this? So what are some of the opportunities? I just touched on this a little bit. Again, consumer delight. What was the consumer's experience in eating the berries? The holy grail for us would be able to correlate consumer experience all the way back to the genetics of how we breed the plants. And so anything that we can do to strengthen supply chain visibility is extremely important. And then be able to correlate events that happen during the supply chain, very important as well. So this gives us the opportunity to identify gaps in that complete supply chain that Bridget even alluded to. One of the things that is important to us as well is it's not necessarily just a one-way push of supplying, say, Walmart or IBM with data. For us, we want to receive data as well. So it's another thing for folks in the audience, that if you're producers or shippers, that type of thing. It's not just a one-way push. We are interested in Walmart's information. I was chatting with Frank about this morning. When did our product arrive at their DC? How long did it sit at their DC? When did it ship to their store? And ideally, when did it move from store receipt into store placement? And if there's any other information that can be shared along that in terms of cold chain performance, that type of thing, we would love to get that information. So we would share origin information. We want middle mile, finished mile, receiving information so that we can look at total supply chain performance as well. And that's got a strong correlation with food safety as well, because then we could see potential breaks in the cold chain where there could be a link to incidents as we're transporting the product. And then another thing that, and I'll get to this in the challenges slide, but it's an opportunity. What we're discovering with the pilot with Walmart is there's some, and Melanie was alluding to this in her part, there's some real challenges around our capability to provide the data that's required to make this work. So let me build on that for a second here. So some practical issues that we're experiencing. And I'll get to the, I'm going to skip down to the bottom, then I'll go back to the top. So harvest data capture. We are a non-vertically integrated farming company. We work with third-party growers. And the way in which we harvest, we do finished goods field harvesting in a distributed manner across the ranch, across the blocks, across the fields. We are not going to be able to put printers in the field or have every harvester wear a little printer to be putting labels on every tray. And every tray is generic. If it's 1 pound strawberry SKUs that we're harvesting, there are thousands of these, right? Thousands and thousands of these trays, and they're all generic. So that's a real challenge for us right now in terms of trying to figure out how can we capture the data, the harvest event, in a way that we can physically capture it, but then also systematically capture it so then it can be shared in the blockchain. And it's an interesting challenge because it pushes us to the forefront of looking at how even the packaging is made. And so we're working with some of our packaging providers to say, is there a way, right now it's almost like an analog analogy. They're just cranked out on these big presses where they're just making these cardboard boxes. Is there a way to put digital printing in there so that we can make each tray unique? So that's the challenge. Either we label them or we figure out a way to make them unique so that we can tie the data to the specific tray. I think Frank had this slide, or Bridget did, where it showed, let's say, the clamshell, the tray, and the pallet. So there's the real challenge is trying to figure out how to label, how to capture the information in a way that can be shared. So there's a physical challenge to how we harvest the fruit, and then in a way in which we can systemize that. And the other part I touched on is we work with third-party growers, so it needs to make sense for our third-party growers as well from a cost perspective. So this is an interesting challenge for us to try to solve. Let me back up a little bit. So I touched on this earlier. We've been hit up by different companies for blockchain participation. So to us, as Driscoll's, where should we invest? Who should we partner with? We don't want to necessarily do a blockchain for Walmart and a separate blockchain for somebody else. So interoperability of blockchains is important as well. I don't have an answer on this one, so don't ask me about this one, but this is a challenge that I'm saying exists for the industry still. Maybe if you have a question around interoperability, we'll put Bridget on the spot and she can speak to this one, but that's important to us. So if we have a transportation-related blockchain, then it should be able to, we should be sharing data from a transportation perspective with a food safety-oriented blockchain. So it's another thing to consider. That's a challenge for us is in terms of long-term blockchain utilization. And then more from a technology perspective, I don't have the answer to this one either, but can we affordably scale? Is this the right platform for Driscoll's size? And we're shipping millions of, billions of clamshells. So can the technology scale at an affordable cost structure for a company such as Driscoll's? So I don't necessarily have the answers. I just wanted to bring more of a practical, where are we at with blockchain perspective to the panel. I think it has a lot of upside. It's a key, as you've heard before, I think it's a key fix for some critical industry issues, but it introduces new challenges that we haven't had to face before. But we want to be aligned with our customers. It's not just Walmart pushing us. There's a number of other large customers that are asking for the same data set. So we need to go back almost to square one, even in terms of our packaging, and look at how do we label, how do we produce the packaging, can we capture the data so that it can be shared?
Excellent. So we're going to transition now to some Q&A. So stick around. We're going to break on time so that you can enjoy lunch. But this is the part where we want to hear what's on your mind. I'm going to jump start it with just a couple of questions that I prepared, and then we'll turn it over to the audience. Brendan, I'd like to start with you. And this is the idea that we know a lot of folks you just mentioned are demanding end-to-end traceability, lots of retailers, food service organizations, suppliers. And you said you see a lot of upside. Give me an example, what are maybe 3 potential benefits you see out of having this type of end-to-end traceability?
So I'll try to tie all this back to consumer delight. Let's look at the first mile. When we receive fruit at our coolers, there is anonymity to it. We know the lot number, we know the ranch, but there's some specifics that we would love to have the details around that not only would benefit Driscoll's from an analytics perspective, but also our partner growers, our third-party growers. So there's a lot of value in capturing the information, I'd say from an origin perspective, but then also middle mile supply chain performance. Blockchain to me it's the link. Walmart has its data, Wegmans has its data, Costco has its data. We have our data. I want their data, they want mine, right? So how do we link? How do we, and Bridget, you had the slide where it was the loop. That's what we're going for, right? We want to be able to share this information so that we can understand, are we doing anything wrong? How can we improve our performance, our cold chain performance? Can we partner with our customers to ensure that, throughput is important, food safety is important, and ultimately the consumer has the best experience eating the berries. That's really the goal. So we're aligned on the goals. Blockchain is an enabler to see that information.
Yep. So it's about shared value and the entire system getting smarter together as opposed to individual companies getting smarter together. Good. Any questions from the audience? We've got some mics up here.
Don't be shy.
Don't be shy, yeah. Okay, if I could ask you to come to one of the mics, identify yourself, and then ask the question, that'd be fantastic. Thank you.
I'm Mike. I'm a grower, mushroom grower. So one of those infographics had the blockchain, which I finally got why it's called a blockchain, is there was a new dot in every block, like new add to the information. And when the IBM example, this $45 billion thing and $100 of outstanding money, I'm thinking of all these different business elements that could benefit from blockchain. And the example with Driscoll is, product traceability, the food traceability. But there's also that payment, and claims and the supply chain and now the limit on distribution and how to get the product moved quicker. And so it's like, what comes first? What's the easier, what's the lower hanging fruit? What's the easier blockchain to tackle and get some confidence in?
So that's a great question. We started with food safety because one of the most important things, Frank mentioned shared value, it's all about collaboration, right? So when you build a blockchain, you need to build 2 things. You need to build a technology solution, but you also need to build the ecosystem. You need to have the participation by all of the different folks, so the growers, the manufacturers, the retailers, the food service organizations, whatever it is, you need everyone to participate and you need everyone to see value. The great thing about food safety is there isn't any competition, because for any organization, everybody knows you're worse off when a food incident hits. Because it's not like, if there's a problem with brand A peanut butter, everyone runs out and buys brand B peanut butter. Everybody's like, well, I'm going to go eat tuna fish, right? So having this collaboration early on has been critical for us to get the momentum that we've got. Now, having said that, this is really a platform for, you have a lot of data on end-to-end traceability on what's going on in terms of time or cold chain. You can use that information in a number of different ways, right? And it's your information. As you upload it onto the blockchain, it's not like you're losing the information. You still own your information. And so you can use it then for data visibility. You could use it for supply chain visibility, for sustainability, to look at sourcing. You can use it in so many different ways. And one of the things that we're doing is, as we're building out this food safety solution, we're also looking at building out the third-party ecosystem, right? So the whole point here is on collaboration, and that's not just collaboration among the participants, the growers, the manufacturers, retailers, et cetera. It's also participant among the hardware manufacturers, the ones who do scanners, the ones who do food safety testing equipment, amongst software vendors, the ones who do shelf life analytics, right? All of these things can be put into play collaborating with that. So Food safety was a place to start because it's socially important and there's huge financial benefit, and because of the collaboration. But in my view, sort of the sky's the limit on where you can go once you've got that as a core starting point.
Can I jump in here? There's a practical example that I've heard as well. It's a little bit more related to transportation, but it's using blockchain technology. So we'll take these, I believe you said mushrooms, it was a mushroom grower. So you have a load that you're shipping today. That is a record that's in the blockchain. It's visible to, say, your customer. And then the transportation provider is picking up. The record of the pickup can be put in the blockchain. When the truck arrives, there's a proof of delivery, a POD document that's put in the blockchain. The example that I heard was that because these records are visible in the blockchain immediately to the customer, freight payment was done right away. The grower, gets paid right away. The instance of fraud and claims in the trucking piece and anything like that is significantly reduced. It was even to the point where the trucker was getting paid in digital currency, which could then, almost like the Bitcoin thing that a lot of people have heard of, was able to just transfer to the bank into dollars. And so it was a win right away from all the parties involved because of the visibility allowed by the blockchain. So it removed concern about payment and investigation and anything like that. And so it worked. I think it just made it much more efficient for all the parties involved because of the visibility, because of the trust that was provided by the visibility in the system.
And just one thing, when we talk about, there are a lot of different ways blockchain can work. You can have totally open information. We're usually talking about sort of enterprise use of blockchain where we're talking permissioned use, which means Walmart decides Driscoll's can see this information and Dole can see this. And Driscoll's decides Walmart can see this and Wegmans can see this, right? So it's not that everyone is seeing every piece of information you have. You have the ability to control who sees your information. And the idea, as Brendan and Frank were saying, is end-to-end transparency so that Driscoll's gets information from Walmart and Walmart gets information from Driscoll's.
We're gonna try to answer a little bit shorter because we want to get as many questions in as possible. Any other questions?
Yeah, hi. Excuse me. I'm Kevin Dunleavy with Supermarketing Promotions. And two questions. I don't know if they're really related, but, you know, I understand a little bit, very little bit. But like with Bitcoin, there's a final number, right? 27 million, whatever that number. In this, is there a finality to the number? That was my first question. And then my second one is, what are some of the cost considerations that a grower shipper should be aware of as they look to understand and how they would implement blockchain?
Let me take the cost because, you know, we're a retailer, and when we actually presented this idea to our CEO, Doug McMillan, Doug said, we're very interested in this, but we don't want to add costs to our suppliers or put a burden on them. And he said, this has to work, and this is his words, only if it's a no-brainer. You know, if it's a lot of cost, then it's not going to work. And so we get that. And so we are adamant that when we work with technology providers such as IBM, that this has to be extremely low cost, and the benefit has to outweigh what you put into it. And so we've floated and have conversations about ideas such as, if you look at networks today, there's a lot of networks such as social media networks, LinkedIn, Twitter, et cetera. We're all in. And why are we in? Because we didn't have to pay. And so there's an element of data entry that you can get in and participate, and you don't pay anything, but you're in. Now, you might have to pay a small amount if you're extracting value out of participating in the system, and that could be arranged a variety of ways, a transaction fee, a small subscription fee, but we're definitely committed to this idea of everyday low cost and not adding cost to our suppliers or producers.
And then really quick answer to the first one is, as I said, we're using different kinds of enterprise blockchain fabrics. We use the Hyperledger fabric that the Linux Foundation has done, which is open source and open governance, and there isn't that kind of limit that Bitcoin has.
Other questions? I saw other hands. Yes.
I'm John Toner with United Fresh Produce Association.
John.
I know a couple of things about blockchain. Our supply chain council has been looking at this technology for quite some time. My question is, we talked about food safety, we talked about transportation. Can you talk a little bit about marketing and sales and consumer? How is blockchain going to help us sell more produce? We've been stuck at 2.7 servings per day forever. Can blockchain help us get us to 3 servings, to 4 servings, to 5 servings? Talk about it from a building the business standpoint, rather than just the supply chain piece.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. Maybe the retailer and the produce
Yeah,
producer.
maybe we'll partner on this, right?
Yeah.
Your slide, though, your image that showed the consumer
Yeah.
with the Walmart app on a smartphone,
Yeah.
just it pops in my mind in terms of establishing trust, right? So food and fraud, the horse meat example,
Yeah.
right? So some people may be reluctant to purchase produce because maybe they fear the origin, or maybe it's not truly organic, right? Why should I pay $1 more for the organic berries? How do I know they're truly organic? And so some customers may care about fair trade. We're thinking like a Whole Foods example, where that's important to their customer base. And so blockchain gives us an opportunity, not for Driscoll's to provide those certifications, but for the actual certifying bodies to provide that. And then it's just simply a matter of how do we present that? So then you look at the retailer, does Walmart want to actually show those, right? Is that some sort of interaction between the customer and, say, a smartphone, where they could actually get validated proof that these are in fact organic, or they came from a fair trade ranch, or that type of thing. So there's upside to sharing the information. The question is how much and to what level of detail.
Yeah, I love the question and the challenge, and I think the only thing that prevents us from really benefiting from the technology is a lack of imagination and how we can use it. So a lot of ideas come to mind. The first thing that comes to mind is think about the world around you. Everything's digitized, and it's been beneficial to business. Why are the airlines all digitized? Why is it how you schedule a vacation digitized? Everything is digitized because it allows a better customer experience. The way you watch movies, the way you watch television, everything is digitized, and it's good for business. But a couple of practical specifics. One is when there's a crisis, everybody's damaged. And so the spinach industry, everyone's damaged, 7 years of lost sales. That's good for sales. Number two is, Brandon said this at breakfast to me this morning. I said, I'm not ashamed of that. You can say that publicly. That the benefits are not really food safety. I'm the food safety guy, and I will tell you that the benefits for food safety are just the tip of the iceberg. The idea or notion that you can optimize supply chains even better and get fresher product to the customer, if the product looks fresher on the grocery store stuff, how many times have you turned away from buying something because it just didn't look fresh enough? That's increased sales.
Yeah, you instinctively know just by looking at it, right, whether or not you should buy it.
What else? I think there's ways for you to engage loyalty and trust. I think there's a way for you to engage in the customer a different way. Who knows, down the road you might say, hey, if you're really digitized and connected with your customers, hey, we noticed you no longer have strawberries in the refrigerator. Maybe you want some more strawberries? Or you know what goes well with those strawberries? Blueberries and a blueberry bowl. So I think the opportunities are endless, and it's just limited by our imagination because we've never had this type of digitized food system available to us. But it's a great challenge, a great question. Other questions? Who else? Well, let me ask one. Think about it, because we got about 10 more minutes, and I want you to get as much value out of this. I had a couple here. Let me ask another one. This one goes to Melanie, because I do believe, we got a question right here. Okay.
This is beyond just a produce question, but blockchain in general. I read an article about the amount of energy consumption that it takes to run like the Bitcoin network, and that it's, because there's so many different computers going back and verifying an entire chain of transactions, that it's just consuming immense amounts of energy. So how can this be sustainable?
And let me just say one thing before people leave. We are going to raffle off a Bitcoin at the end of this, aren't we? So, look, they're all coming back
around.
So that's a great question. So blockchain is a fantastic technology that was invented about 10 years ago, first use case being cryptocurrency. And the first instantiation was Bitcoin, which used something called data mining, which is a really energy-intensive way of basically doing really hard math problems to prove that the blockchain is, in fact, trusted and the one that you agreed to. Now, as we looked at, after blockchain had been invented, right, some really smart people looked at it and was like, well, you know what, you can actually prove that that blockchain is identical without doing this kind of heavy lifting. You can do it in a smarter way. And it's especially easier if you're not trying to run an anonymous blockchain, right? And so, because the thing is, if you have an anonymous blockchain, you need consensus among a whole bunch of people and you don't know who they are. So, you know, maybe some guy named Joe is really untrustworthy and he owns 51% of the nodes. He can actually collude and create problems. And so you need to make it really hard for that to happen. If you have some of the new technologies and you have transparency in terms of who the different participants are, you can do it in a much more energy efficient way. So rather than having, you know, the hundreds of thousands or millions of nodes that you have on Bitcoin on like a Hyperledger fabric, you can have 50. And so rather than us trying to solve something like world hunger, let's say, by creating huge climate change problems, we're actually doing it in a really efficient way, which, to the earlier question on cost, is actually really cost efficient. So rather than having, hey, every person has to have their own copy of the node, you're looking at a small number of copies, but you have that same level of security and confidence. So it's more cost effective, more energy efficient without losing the security and privacy.
Any other questions? Let me ask one, and then you're gonna want to stay for the close, because I'm gonna ask the panelists to give you one tip. If they were in your shoes, what's the one thing they would do? Melanie, you want to come to PTI standards, because the deeper we got into blockchain, the more appreciative and grateful we were for all of the good work that GS1 has done on standards, because it's really going to enable blockchain to scale. But if you think about PTI, a lot of the people in this room have been on this PTI journey. What do you hear from folks? What are some of the barriers that are preventing us from even making more progress in adoption of PTI standards?
Well, I think it's a lot of what Brendan said about it goes back to a pretty broad system of participants that don't all have the same technological capability. So we don't believe that we've solved all of these challenges. I think adoption has gone up tremendously in the past few years particularly, but we still face, I think, the two things. To truly get to 100% value benefit realization, we have to make it automated and ubiquitous. And so that means we're gonna have to find ways to work with small growers so that they really don't have to change what they're doing, but they can still participate. And like Brendan said, it's not about putting, you know, like the Hertz guy who has the printer on his belt.
That's what I was thinking, the Hertz guy.
Yeah, but that it happens in an automated way. So package creation, I think how we automate uniqueness, identity uniqueness at package creation is going to be a critical part of it. But I do think we're making great progress with produce traceability, and that's really, right, as anything, it's a Herculean effort by a lot of participants. Yeah. So setting standards is, you know, I won't say it's easy because they wouldn't pay me if it was easy, but setting standards is just a small piece of being able to implement that. So our team is actually I work in corporate development, so we're the future thinking team, and we're really interested in the notion of the future of food and how we can create automated ubiquity so that everyone can participate, because that's when blockchain gets all the data it needs to provide all the value. And I love the notion of then personalizing that value to the consumer, post-purchase engagement in the home, replenishment, all those things are part of it. So I think that this is really, for me, how do we take PTI to the next level, even if we're not at already 100% adoption.
And just something to add that I've heard from other produce growers is, you know, they haven't really necessarily seen benefit from PTI, right? So it's a lot of effort, and then now what? You know, it's there, but a lot of the benefit is still being realized other parts of the value chain. And I think, as Brendan and Frank have made the point repeatedly, what blockchain does is then allow you to share that information. So the benefit that the retailer gets in having the information of being able to identify individual units is then passed back to the original producer in a way that says, okay, all of this investment that I've made in PTI, now with blockchain I can actually realize the increased benefit, the increased value to my own business, because I can see where those lots went, what consumer bought them, how long they went. I can start extending shelf life because I'm being smarter about where things are going, and then I can sell more.
Yeah, I agree. That's fantastic. Yep. Good. So I started off the presentation and asked how many of you knew something about blockchain. How many of you feel like you know a lot more about blockchain now? Fantastic. That's successful. I thought we'd close by asking, and I'll start it off. Because if I were in your shoes, what I would want to know is, from these folks, what recommendation do you have of me? So the question is, you know, what one thing would you recommend for the audience that just sat through this presentation? Because, you know, we like to emphasize, we know you don't come here just to satisfy your intellectual curiosity. You actually want to learn something that's actionable and you can take back to your respective places of business. My recommendation would be simple, which is to get started now. I really would. I don't think this is a fad. You know, last year people were starting to talk about blockchain. This year it's really front and center. You're seeing more and more significant actors get in. And so get started now and doing your own proof of concept or pilot. You know, what will it mean for my supply chain? And do that by identifying a business challenge that you want to solve, not I want to do a blockchain pilot. What is the business problem that you're trying to solve?
Let me jump in here because I'm going to build on what you said. Exactly that. I would look at what are the challenges that you're experiencing. So if they're market claims, quality rejections, look at where you've got a business problem and how could sharing of data help you solve that problem.
That's a good ad. Yeah. Excellent.
So that's where to start, right? Because where do you start with blockchain? It's so huge. Start where you've got a core operational issue is what I would recommend.
Good.
And I would say, as you do this, remember that while blockchain is a great new technology, what you want to apply it on are fundamentals to your business. And so, you know, it's great to think about, you know, trying out new things, but a lot of the data that you're talking about is data that is absolutely core to the value of your business. And so when you work with a supplier, make sure that they have good governance around what happens to your data. You know, do you own it? That they are running it on a full stack of hardware and software that's going to keep your data secure. It's going to be auditable, reliable, all of those kind of things. And that you are going to be able to not lock yourself in, right? Interoperability and standards are still critically important. And so as you do this, give yourselves the flexibility to, moving forward, use other kinds of things in conjunction with what you're building now. So a lot to consider, I guess.
Well, I agree with everything that's been said, so I'm going to throw out the curveball and say don't be afraid to define aspirational use cases, right? Because
awesome.
to Bridget's earlier point, sometimes it's hard, particularly if you're far upstream, to see what am I getting out of this? So think about the future, how consumers could be benefited by what we're all doing with increased traceability and transparency, and then what that means you can derive future consumer value, which again is all right to your revenue growth and profitability. So you can't be afraid to define an aspirational use case that really is in-home replenishment, leveraging smart appliances and devices. You put it on paper. If you really think there could be value there, tracking loyalty, promotion, advertising, and that shared data, there's some really exciting things that you can do. You know, don't let perfect be the enemy of the good, but also provide that executive insight about where we could take this a few years down the line.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, each and every one, for being here and for your interest in blockchain. And on behalf of all of us, thank you for the important role you're playing in providing safe, affordable produce so that people can live better. Thank you.